You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin and Tony is with me, and we are here to discuss everything from the past 3 weeks. That's right, 3 weeks, because in the last episode that we discussed all the service news, I kept saying 2 weeks, and then I realized after the fact it was actually 3 weeks. But it was from the dates of December 19th to January 9th that we were going to be discussing all the content news from. As expected and predicted, there was not a ton of news over the holidays, but there was a decent, steady trickle of stuff that makes a giant mound of things to cover today, but there isn't, honestly, there's probably just a little bit more than a normal 1 week time frame in between episodes like normal. So we're going to dive straight into Netflix first. First up, more details have been revealed for the upcoming He-Man and the Masters of the Universe CG series. Basically, there was a poster that was released, and we know in fact will be CG. This is the series that Kevin Smith is involved in. Next up, we have the adult animated series, The Midnight Gospel, has been ordered at Netflix. This is coming from Pendleton Warden and Duncan Trussell. The Netflix VP of International Film reveals a giant slate of new international films that are coming in 2020. Jung Woo Sung will executive produce a new mystery thriller series called The Silent Sea. Netflix has ordered an Egyptian original series featuring a satirical puppet. Netflix has ordered a second season of The A-List after BBC has pulled out. They were co-producing the first season, and they've pulled out of the second season, so Netflix will move forward alone on that series. Reality dating series Love is Blind has also been ordered, and this is going to be hosted by Nick and Vanessa Lachey, and it's coming from the producer that is previously worked with Married at First Sight. So that is Netflix. I know that you wanted to talk about the international film article because there were some other bits in that article outside of just the slate of films.
When I initially read this for prep for the show, I was just like, okay, cool, just another interview with another VP talking about stuff. But it really brought up a couple. Maybe the interview by itself did not bring up interesting points, but some of the conclusions from it are a little bit interesting. I found a little odd that yes, he is in charge of the international film part of Netflix, but he isn't in charge of all the international projects going at Netflix. Either they're actively producing or they're co-producing through other companies, because it talks about how he is in charge of, essentially, paraphrasing the article, he's in charge of essentially everything that's not China, Japan, Korea, that part of Asia. Because he says, yeah, he's like, I'm in charge of everything not Asia. Well, Asia is a pretty huge continent, and so what he really means is more of Japan, China, Korea, those markets, because he does do stuff with like India and the Middle East and whatnot. So I found that a little interesting of how, like, why is there that delineation between his department and that other department at Netflix working on those films? Maybe it could be that, once again, we don't really know much about Netflix's numbers, but it could be that China, Korea, and Japan, and Indonesia, maybe their numbers are stronger, so that instead of being more of an area for Netflix to develop, they're already strategic partners in those areas. So they don't have to build up the brand there. They already have the brand there, and that's how come it's in a different part of Netflix. Do you have any comments on that, of how that delineation is there?
Well, I think
I'm just hypothesizing of why there's that separation, but
yeah,
that must be the only reason, because if not, that doesn't make any sense given the information that we know.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that maybe the Asian market by itself is too large of a market for one person to be over. And the thing is, Russia and China both don't have Netflix available. Now, you could watch it if you were using a VPN within China or Russia, but the service itself is not legally allowed in those countries. But you still have the Korean market, which is huge, and you still have the rest of Asia and Japan, and it is popular. Not that, like you said, we don't have numbers specifically, but we can see that there's a lot of content that's coming out of that area of the world, which means it has to be popular because they wouldn't be investing money in the, new content. We've heard a lot of deals coming from the Korean market recently. There's a reason for that. It's because there's either a massive growth potential in those markets or because there's already a decent sized subscriber base based in those specific regions that they're scooping up content and paying a lot of money. Also, just recently in India, and I know this is not part of what you were saying, but in India, they just announced a couple months back, there was a keynote that was given by Reed Hastings about Netflix in India, and he committed that they were going to be spending like $400 million on original content that was Indian based for, the Indian subscriber base. And those markets in general, but specifically the Asian markets, because that's what you're talking about. Those markets, I think the thing is they're so rich with the amount of content that's coming out of them that they probably have their own person over them instead of just having, because the thing is, like, those are also parts of the parts of the world that are very, very high in population base, which could translate to subscriber base. While when you look at a lot of the other places that a lot of the content comes from, generally a lot of content comes from Europe, the population base is large, but nowhere near the size of those areas in Asia. So I imagine that it's just a different thing, and that's why he's not in charge of it.
Gotcha. There was a specific moment in the interview where the interviewer was asking the VP about his strategy in Latin America, and to really summarize it seemed like the VP didn't have a poor understanding of the way how language works in the world, and this is just my point of view, and Dustin, correct me if I'm wrong, but reading it, the interviewer was just like, so what are your plans for like Latin America and expansion there, like, and the VP kind of didn't, it seemed like he really didn't give an answer, but it's essentially seemed like there wasn't too much happening with the Latin America area. I'm not saying that there aren't any films, it's not saying that he's not producing any films, just it seems like he's really focused in like the EU areas, and so focusing on films for like Germany and in German, Spanish and in areas like that. That's kind of seems where he's like focusing right now. And the interviewer was like, well, do you have any like plans for like Latin America? And he was just like, well, not really an answer. The interviewer was like, well, I mean, it's already, Spanish, and the VP was like, yeah, like we already kind of covered that area, since we're already focusing our efforts in Spain. And it's like, dude, and in Portugal, it's like, dude, it's like, yes, although Latin America, they do speak, Spanish and Portuguese. Most of the South America speaks Spanish, with Brazil speaking Portuguese. It's like, yes, although that is true, they do share the same language. It's like one kind of completely different dialects at times, but even more important, it's like, it's a different culture. Like, yes, it's kind of inherited that culture, but it's just completely, even among the Latin America, countries, and then like, going to Mexico and then going to Spain are like two different things, like, yes, they do speak Spanish, but it's different. So I figured like, dude, you kind of aren't getting the whole point of international. It's like, yes, just because something's in a certain language does not mean it's that culture. It's like in America, we speak English, so do the Brits, so do the Australians, but our cultures are completely different. Even between like the United States and Canada, it's like as similar as you could possibly be between, like some like two nations, and it's like there's still distinct differences. I feel like that VP just didn't get that, and I was like, oh, dude, come on, you're in charge of international, and like you're not seeing that. So hopefully I am wrong in this analysis, but from that one interview I got, it's like, oh, dude, come on.
It would be like comparing two different countries that speak English and saying, well, the UK is the same as the US. It's not any different, or it is extremely different, and it's kind of disingenuous to say, well, because they speak the same language, we're representing those areas. And that was disappointing. So, but I mean, otherwise, it was, once again, you can see how Netflix's push for international growth is the bedrock of its business. I mean, it's kind of ties into the last episode where we talked about Netflix's strategy. It's like, once again, they are focusing on international, and I like how they aren't just focusing on just like international releases or whatnot. I like how they're getting films and actors and stuff in those cultures, in those areas, in making films that, yes, can, once you get a translation, can reach to a broader market. It's like, all these films are probably going to be dubbed into English, and that's great for like overall numbers, but I do appreciate how they're getting content for those local areas in those languages, because if you want to do like statistics, most of the world can speak English, like a good chunk of it can, and you want to subdivide that, like you have Spanish and Mandarin and other languages that are up there as some of the tops, and it's great that you can in these few languages kind of get most of the world. But there is something to say of delivering content in somebody's like first language that really, I think that matters. And yes, Netflix has to be picky about like which languages they choose from like an investment standpoint. That stinks, but it's
this ugly side of business. They have to make those choices. But I do appreciate how they are trying to make that extra effort to really hit consumers and be like, you know what, we will at best, what is strategically best for us. We will try to deliver content in your first language. I think that is something special that I haven't really seen anyone really kind of focus on. Usually it just used to be like, the big ones. But now like, focusing on like German and, the Nordic areas and stuff like that. I think that's great business strategy in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. So moving over to Prime Video, we have two little pieces. Amazon partners with BBC for a show called The Offenders, and then the Spanish series The Boarding School is going to be rebooted for Amazon Prime as well. Jumping over to Apple TV Plus, there's another two quick things, but both worth mentioning and having a quick discussion. So first up, there's a video game comedy called Mythic Quest, which will debut on February 7th. Now, this is not any sort of surprise. This is a show that we've actually heard about before, but it's premiering on February 7th. But what makes it more unique is that this is the first show that Apple is dropping that will have all of the episodes of the season available when it when it debuts. All 9 episodes of this series will be available immediately. I've watched the trailer for it. It looked like a mix between if you took Silicon Valley and you mixed it with something like It's Sunny in Philadelphia. That's what it kind of reminded me of. But it's interesting because this is a comedy series, most likely shorter episodes. And I said this is the first series, but it's actually not. I forgot about Dickinson. They did release the entire season of Dickinson when it released as well. And I wonder if the reason why is because that also was meant to be more comedy, even though it was like a period comedy or a period drama comedy. I wonder if the shorter episodes, that's the direction they're looking to go, is them releasing the seasons that have shorter episodes all at once, because releasing just a 25-minute episode every single week for multiple weeks might not be beneficial for the success of the show. The other piece that came out was that, and this has been rumored for actually about 2 months now, but Richard Plepper has inked a 5-year exclusive deal at Apple TV Plus. Now, if you're unfamiliar with who Richard Plepper is, he's actually the former CEO of HBO. He worked at HBO for almost 3 decades, but he was put in charge of HBO back in about 8 years ago, and he is best known for having a lot of very popular shows make it onto the air while he was at HBO, not just while he was the CEO, but in general. There's, you look at HBO and a lot of the most memorable shows have come out in the past 2 decades, and a lot of them stem from when he was there.
Is that my math background, is that a correlation or is that a causation? Was he the cause of those good shows, or just was he there when they happened and things going well? You know what I mean? Like, is he directly responsible for those shows in some form or fashion?
Right, I completely agree, because the thing is, based off of everything that I find, when you look up Richard Plepper, he's attributed to the fact that HBO has been successful, but there's nothing directly connected to say HBO has grown in popularity due to him and his decisions at the company. While you could say the same thing about any CEO at any company, if the company itself is having success, the CEO is always going to be attributed with the success of the company. However,
yeah, but if we
when it's an entertainment,
Bob Iger, you can
exactly.
You look at like specific moments where his decisions affected the future of Disney.
Exactly. And when you look at an entertainment company, it's a very different thing, because you can look at the choices that the entertainment company has made while under that CEO, and you can see a direct correlation of whether or not it's because of their leadership. Bob Iger is a perfect example of that. And while there have been some really successful shows at HBO over the past, let's just say, the last decade, because of him being CEO for less than the past decade, there has been some successful shows. Game of Thrones, I believe, started before he was CEO. So, I mean, while he could have been involved in stuff behind the scenes, I don't think it's exactly the same as saying that the success of HBO comes solely from him and his leadership. The other part of this announcement that he's going to be working with Apple TV Plus is that he's not working as an executive with Apple TV Plus. He's basically inking a deal with a production company that he's created. So he's going out and going to be looking for series that he can go and sell off to Apple TV, which I guess when you look at it like that, it implies that he has the ability to find good projects, or at least he has people working with him who have the ability to find good projects. And that would be why Apple signed a deal with him. But it also is interesting because he's worked as an executive for a company for such a long period of time, and now he's going to be working on the production side of it, trying to sell these series to a service. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. And I'm definitely wanting to keep an eye on this as it goes forward, because I don't know if this is, there was a big deal being made about this 2 months ago when it was rumored that he was going to be working at Apple TV. And at the time, a lot of people assumed that he was going to be brought in as an executive and try to like take that HBO magic dust that he had and kind of let it settle over at Apple TV Plus, since that seems to be what they're trying to do, is trying to go towards the HBO model of creating high budget, high quality content for their service. And by bringing in an executive that used to work at HBO, it makes perfect sense. He did leave HBO specifically. He was quoted to say that he wasn't a fan of the way AT&T was managing things, and that's one of the reasons that he left. He could end up bringing some really good shows to Apple TV Plus, and it could be extremely successful, or it could completely flop because he's never actually ran a production company. He's just been an executive at a company. And there's plenty of executives who make the transition to the production side of things, and they can turn it into a successful endeavor. We don't know if that's possible at this point, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I have a few more questions, or maybe just one more. So obviously you have AT&T buying Warner Media, which, houses, HBO. And that happened kind of recently. When did this guy leave HBO, and under what circumstances? Was he like ousted when AT&T bought him, or did he just retire before that? Or do you know any more specifics about him and AT&T and all the step stuff?
My understanding is that it wasn't that he was ousted. He decided to leave. He left. The whole AT&T Time Warner deal had finished and settled, and this was a way long time ago. Everything that was settled happened about 9 months prior to him leaving. So it was definitely like he did not like the direction things were going and he left. Or maybe he just wanted to get out. I mean, he was quoted at the time of saying that he had no desire to be an executive anywhere else. He wanted to specifically reboot himself as a producer. So, and like I said, there's plenty of executives who do this. They get tired of working within the confines of a company or a corporation, especially ones that have parent corporations, and they decide to go off on their own. It happens all the time. I mean,
well, no. You answered my question. I just didn't know, like, if I didn't know the circumstances of him, an ex-executive of HBO going to Apple could either be scandalous, could be normal. It could just be that he just wanted to retire. It could just be that he wanted a new challenge. Like, there's a lot of different ways that this could go, and so that's why I was trying to get a little bit more clarification on, like, okay, what happened when, so that I wouldn't be so lost. But no, you answered those questions. It just kind of sounds like he's just like, what, he just wants a change, and given his kind of tenure at HBO and the success that he had, he thinks that he also has an eye for not just necessarily being a good executive, but also being, leading a production company, finding talent and finding, shows and whatnot. So, I mean, good for him. I want a little bit more information on, like, is the HBO success really due to him? Was he the guy to be like, what, let's give Game of Thrones a chance, I'll sign off. Like, if I knew that, I'd be a little bit more, like, yay for Apple. But you know what? Good for Apple. Good for him. And let's just see what happens.
All right. So then moving over to Disney Plus, they revealed just after the beginning of the year a video that showcases their 2020 slate. And while a lot of what was revealed in the slate is not surprising because it's stuff that we already knew about, for example, the second season of The Mandalorian, the first Marvel show with the Falcon and Winter Soldier. The one that was a surprise, however, was WandaVision, because the early reports and everything we've seen up to this point was that the only Marvel show that was actually going to be coming out in 2020 was actually the Falcon and Winter Soldier. Everything else was scheduled to come out after that. The weird part is, and I remember sending this to you on our Discord, was on the 31st of December, there was all these articles that were popping up online on a variety of different sites talking about how now that The Mandalorian is over, there's a large number of people who they're canceling their accounts because there's no more content for them. And it was specifically meaning anybody who signed up for the Star Wars, the Marvel, the fans of the very genre-specific type of content, not for the back catalog. of the back library that Disney has, not for, the original movies that are very family based, not for that type of content. They were looking for the genre specific stuff, so everybody was canceling their subscriptions. And I think offline we had talked about this, about how outside of the Clone Wars, there's not really a whole lot there that's going to keep people engaged up until the point where like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier comes out, or even the Mandalorian season 2. If you're just a Star Wars fan, you've got the Clone Wars, and that comes out next month, and even then there's going to be a stretch of time in between that and the other content that's coming out that would appeal to the genre specific audience that that enjoys comics or sci-fi. So it was interesting because those articles were popping up, and I'm not even joking, the next day that video popped up, it was like, oh, guess what? You thought we were only having one Marvel show next year? There's actually two. And while there's nothing else is going to change, as far as there's not going to be an extra Star Wars show that pops up, they're not going to somehow squeeze in an extra Marvel show on top of that. It does show that there is stuff on the horizon, and maybe WandaVision got moved up just slightly because they were looking to make sure that once they start having the fresh content, like the second season of The Mandalorian and the Falcon Winter Soldier, they continue to have more of that type of content on a regular basis. So you go from one genre specific show into the next, even if it is, a Marvel, then a Star Wars, then a Marvel show, specifically so that you keep those people from unsubscribing to the service. So I thought it was kind of interesting how it was almost like it felt like the PR department was combating those articles about people dropping the stuff, even though there's no reason for those people to resubscribe up until the point in time that new content comes out. But it does show that at least some plans have shifted, where maybe the Falcon Winter Soldier is actually going to be moved up a little bit. And while the earliest estimates we've heard is August of 2020, maybe it's coming out just a little bit earlier. The Mandalorian season 2 is slated for fall, which could be as early as September, and that could come out much earlier than most people are anticipating, since they're already filming it now. Then go right into WandaVision immediately after that. And we know that the Falcon Winter Soldier and WandaVision, they're meant to only, I believe, have 6 episodes each. So they're going to, they're only going to take a month and a half for them to release the entire season. So I think it's important for Disney to have that large amount of content that appeals to that specific audience, because that audience is not going to be okay with paying money just to watch old movies. Most of them who are subscribing to the service, they don't need to subscribe to the service to watch the Marvel and the Star Wars films. And even if they did, they're not going to watch them nonstop repeatedly for the next 8 months until we get a new show.
No, I mean, you are completely correct. We talked about this not from a theoretical perspective, but from an analytical perspective. We were talking about this, and then I got to experience this firsthand when I finished The Mandalorian, which is a great show. And sitting there, I'm like, what am I going to do next? Well, so I went back and saw a few more other things that I liked, but I finished, and I was a little bit worried of, okay, what am I going to do now? So I would have canceled Disney Plus by now, but I just have it for my kid so she can watch things. And it's like, okay, well, this is a bummer. And it is nice to see there's 2020 slate, because we pretty much knew what was going to come, what the future of Disney Plus was. We just didn't know when things were going to happen. And so seeing a definitive timeline of, you get the Winter Soldier, you get WandaVision, you get the Mandalorian again. I think Disney kind of read some of the press and was like, okay, we really need to give 2020 some purpose. If not, then we will definitely lose some subscribers. Everyone understands growing pains, but you got to have your crap together, when you're going to run a business. And I felt like Disney was like, hey, we're kind of pushing it with some of these folks. And so it is good to see how Disney is release the slate. And I think it's going to reassure some people to hold on for a little bit longer, and you will get more content out there. And so I think it's great. As much as I love back catalog things, and I love The Office and How Much Mother and stuff like that, you do need original content. And I think Disney Plus is a great case of all right, you might have one of the best back catalogs in the world in terms of IP and stuff like that, but you do need original content to drive the service, especially with adults. If Disney Plus was a kid service, it'd be great, just let it sit as it is and you'd be good to go almost. But if you're going to try to grow, you need different audiences, and you need to attract them and keep them. So good for me as a consumer to be like, okay, this is Disney Plus's plan for the future.
Yeah, and it does feel like a lot of what they're banking on is the fact that the price point is extremely low, and exactly what you said, which is you still have the service because there's content for your kid. And that's really, I think, what they're banking on. Like, while they might loop a lot of the adults in with the fresh original content like The Mandalorian, if you have the service and you have kids, the kids are going to use it. I mean, my kids use it. I haven't watched a ton of stuff on Disney Plus since The Mandalorian has ended, but I know, I mean, my kids watch all kinds of stuff on there. So, I mean, like, I think the lower price point was smart because, and we've talked about the price point before, but I just want to state, if the price point wasn't where it was, and let's just say it was a $10 a month charge, there'd be a lot of people who would probably drop it after there's no more original content. But that also makes me worried about the potential of them raising the price once they start to get more original content, because there will be, or a more consistent flow of original content, I should say, because it feels as if they move in a direction where we have a Marvel show followed by a Star Wars show, followed by a Marvel show, and they just keep going. They've got a consistent level of content that's coming out on a weekly basis for a long period of time. I feel like then it would be a point where they're like, maybe we need to raise the price, or we have the ability to raise the price without losing a bunch of people, because we have a bunch of content that people are going to want to see. And it just is like that growing pains of trying to get to that point, and they counter the growing pains by making sure that the price point is low enough where, as a parent, you're looking at it and saying, it's not that much money so that my kid is occupied and has content to watch that I know what it is, instead of just watching stuff on YouTube. Yeah,
I mean, you couldn't have said it any better.
So, all right. So HBO Max, two things real quick. The Beach, in development as a 1-hour drama series. This is based off of a book called this is from the Life Sentence creators. There's also a Last of the Mohicans series. This is a series that's actually been shopped around by Paramount Television for quite some time, and it turns out HBO Max has decided to grab it and give it a script order, so that's happening. Jumping into some other services, we've got a bunch of Quibi stuff as usual. First up, Quibi is developing a drama series called Dead Spots based off of Melissa F. Olson's book. We have a new stop motion series called Gloop World coming from Justin Rowland. On Quibi, there's an interactive dating series called The Hot Drop and a comedic travel series called High and Low.
Since we're talking about Quibi, can you give like a 2-second ear analysis on their recent CES unveiling?
Yes. So those of you who don't know, I know we talked about this on the last episode, but those of you who don't know, Quibi had a keynote at CES. We're going to go a lot more in depth on the next episode when we discuss the service news, because there's a bunch to talk about. But the basis as far as the content goes is there is a ton of new shows that are coming to Quibi. There's a variety of different movies. There's daily shows that are coming. We've talked about a ton of them, but the intent of the CES keynote, and the reason why we're not really focusing on it today, is because a lot of it is not content based. It's more about the price points, the rollout of the service, demonstrations of how the service actually works. We've talked about how it's a mobile only service and you will only be able to use it on your phones. They're not making apps for other devices like TVs or the Rokus or any of the other streaming devices that are out there. It's just meant for phones and viewing on your phones. And they gave some demonstrations of the vertical viewing and the horizontal viewing, and the differences of how that type of viewing can interact with how you are actually viewing a movie or a TV show. There's a lot to go into the nitty-gritty as far as the actual service itself, but as far as content goes, we've been talking about it for quite some time. There's a ton of content that's coming from Quibi, and the reason why is because it is very short episodes. They're saying everything is going to be between 6 to 10 minutes, nothing longer than 10 minutes. It's entirely intended for you to view it on the go while you're traveling, while you're in the car, obviously not driving, or you're on the train, or you're on, you're traveling and you're getting from point A to point B. It's content that you can watch very quickly and in very small bite-sized versions of it, so that you're not needing to feel like you're missing out on something. There's going to be a lot of things that will be released weekly. There'll be content that is released. There's a whole group of content called Daily Essentials, which will feature sports and news from a wide variety of different channels like ESPN or Fox News or CNN headline news. There's all kinds of channels that will be producing content for Quibi as part of these Daily Essentials. But then there will be like higher tier content where they'll have their television series that are original for it, which will still be released in like small episodes or small chapters of an overall story. story. And then they'll have the top tier, which is like movies, which they have a lot of different movies that are being created in this new format, but will be released in chapters. And not everything is going to release, within a week. Everything's going to be released in, maybe a couple of weeks, or, one episode per week, just like a typical TV show, to give people a chance to like get caught up and not have to worry about falling behind. They want to control the narrative when it comes to people talking about the shows as they're happening. So content-wise, that's what they discussed. But as we've already talked about, because every episode we have at least 3 to 4 news pieces about new shows. The reason why that is happening is because there's a lot of time to fill up, and they need to create a bunch of different types of content specifically for the service because of the format that it is in. It's not it's not like some of the other services out there that provide free ad-supported video on demand, AVOD, the Pluto TV, Plex, where you're watching content for free, but it's interspersed with ads. That's content that they're just licensing from elsewhere, or they're splitting the cost of they're splitting the profits of the ads with the original content producer. It's not the same type of thing. They're looking to have their own original content specifically for their service, so that no one else you're not going to find the content anywhere else. So content-wise, that's the gist of what to expect from Quibi.
Gotcha.
All right, so then jumping over to Hulu, first up, there was a series called The Vampire Chronicles that was talked about a couple months back. Hulu has decided to pass, and they are not going to be picking that series up, so we might hear that show picked up by somebody else down the road, but for right now, it's not moving forward at Hulu. The other Hulu news is that there was actually a video advertisement that was released during the Golden Globes promoting FX on Hulu, and we were talking about this offline before the show. I can't remember if we talked about this on the show before or not. I feel like we did at some point. But if you're unfamiliar with the entire story of FX, I'm going to give you like a 30-second rundown. So FX was owned by Fox. FX also had FXX, which was another channel. These are 2 channels that were on cable television that you would subscribe to just with your basic channel package. The FXX had the streaming rights to the entire Simpsons series. Disney bought Fox. Disney became the owners of FX and FXX. There was a streaming service that FX had that you paid a monthly subscription fee, and you had access to all the FX content as well as the entire series of The Simpsons as part of the XXX group of content that was available. Disney shut down that service, and then they announced shortly after that The Simpsons would be then coming to Disney Plus, which we know has already happened. This is all happening about 2 years ago. Earlier mid-2019, we had the president of FX say that they're still trying to heavily compete with creating quality content. FX has always been known as like kind of the basic cable version of HBO in the sense of they make high quality stuff, but not necessarily the higher budget that like HBO does with a lot of their shows. They've won a massive amount of awards. I think they're the most awarded cable television station because of the type of content that they create, which is very high quality. And they said that they were struggling to figure out the direction of where they were going, but it was revealed that the FX content was going to be meant to bolster the amount of content that Hulu had. And this all comes back to Hulu trying to compete on the larger scale of how much content they have. And it also goes in line with what we've talked about before about how Disney Plus is meant for the family and everybody who's in the family, but they need something else that's, that subsidizes the amount of content that a subscriber to Disney Plus would have. And if you subscribe to Hulu as well, which is also obviously Disney owned and part of that bundle option that they have, the Hulu content, while there are original series that Hulu has, and there's obviously content you could watch that's already aired elsewhere, they were looking at, okay, we're going to take all that FX content, stick it on Hulu, and there's a ton of adult geared content toward, on Hulu, where if you have this larger package with Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus, you now have a ton of content that could subsidize the fact that Disney Plus doesn't have a lot of that stuff, or doesn't have content that's geared more specifically at adults. Fast forward to now, it's now been announced that is actually that entire campaign of getting FX content over to Hulu. I believe even at the last quarterly, or maybe it was the annual, Bob Iger was saying that they were planning on making FX stuff available like immediately after it airs on television, because it will just help sell Hulu as the place where you can get this content. It also puts them in the same line of, it puts Hulu in the same line of, if they're having this high quality content, they can compete directly with HBO. So that's kind of where we're at. The video advertisement that was released was basically like, FX is coming to Hulu in March of 2020, so it's just right around the corner. And the announcement also included that not only will the back catalog of FX series be on Hulu, but also the current shows will be on Hulu immediately after they air on the network. So FX is going to definitely make your Hulu subscription a little bit better, a little bit much beefier. I've watched a lot of really good content on FX over the years. So needless to say, we complain about how Disney may not have the right amount of content on Disney Plus, but if you definitely have Hulu as part of that bundle like you do, you're definitely going to have a lot more content you can check out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy, because once I saw this announcement, I'm like, oh, my Hulu Plus subscription is now a little bit more interesting, because for a while I couldn't find, like, I knew that Hulu has stuff, but it's like, I don't want to watch The Handmaid's Tale. There's a couple other original ones for Hulu, but I was like, I besides like South Park and How I Met Your Mother, I was like, I'm trying to find content on here, and it's nice knowing that this FX, quote unquote channel on Hulu is going to, I think that's really going to be nice, because I can get my HBO type like, or AMC like content on here, but it's on Hulu Plus, so that's kind of nice.
All right, so the last news bit is that Comcast has announced that they have partnered with Starz for a new licensing agreement, which will see thousands of hours of content coming to Peacock when Peacock launches. And actually, as we're talking about this, and in case you didn't listen, you only listen to our content episodes, Peacock is getting a massive reveal in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be talking a lot about that and what's happening, because Peacock is probably, while we have some details on some of the shows that they've greenlit for the series, there's so much conflicting information when it comes to the service. It feels like everything's been chucked at the wall, and we're just waiting to see what actually has stuck, because there's so many different things that are part of Peacock that come out in these little bits instead of like a large amount of information. It'll be interesting to see. It's practically the same thing as right before HBO Max had their big reveal in the end of October, how we had a good idea of what to expect, but we didn't know the for sure confirmed details. But this means there's a bunch of content. This also means that I'm guessing Starz is ending their relationship. I think they actually already did. They ended their relationship with Netflix, because they used to have a licensing deal where a lot of the Starz content was on Netflix. But that means all the other Starz content is potentially coming over to Peacock, which could be big get for Peacock, considering Starz is a premium network that you typically have to pay a reasonable amount of money for. So developing, and we'll see what happens. To end our episode, before we get into the trailers, there is a quick discussion point that I want to talk about, which is The Mandalorian is completed. And if you listen to our service episode, you know that we have a discussion point that we want to talk about on the next episode, comparing the popularity of The Mandalorian to The Witcher. And I've watched all of Mandalorian. I've watched The Witcher. I know Tony has watched The Mandalorian. So real quick, we just want to give our quick review of The Mandalorian. And I'll start by saying the show is really, really good. I felt like there was points where it was a little slow, but I didn't have a problem with it being slow, in the sense of I wasn't sure where it was going, because it felt like we were just getting these individual chapters. But once we got to the point, I think it was like episode 6 or 7, where everything starts to come together and you realize there's all these individual chapters have led to them all joining up at this one point. It was a significantly large enough payoff. I felt like it was worthwhile, and all those other chapters didn't feel like they were as slow, because they were just building towards it. I do feel as if if you watch the show from beginning to end all in one chunk, I feel like it works a little bit better, but I tend to say that about practically everything. But I don't think that the release really hindered it. I mean, honestly, there were some massive reveals in the final episode. There were some really good moments. I'm interested to see which character. There are certain characters that aren't around that I wish were going to still be around, but then there's a lot of other things that we will see that's coming, that they've hinted at just in those final episodes. Overall, phenomenal series. Makes me appreciate Star Wars more than I've appreciated Star Wars for a while, because there's been some moments within the movies that I've enjoyed, but this series really felt like the heart of what Star Wars is, which makes perfect sense given the people who are involved in the series. But I can't wait for the second season.
I think overall I'd say it's probably one of the better shows of the year, just from start to finish. I think it is just a great show. I think for a flagship show, it definitely delivered. Yes, I do agree at times it was a little bit slow, but it wasn't slow in a way of like it was bad. It was just like this is a little bit slow. There's not much going on, but everything that was happening was good. It helped that some of the episodes weren't a full hour or the standard like 40 something minutes for an hour show. You know what I mean? Like some of these shows ended sooner than expected time-wise, which I think it was good. It told the story. It wasn't bound to meeting, certain network requirements. And I think that's great, especially for some of these streaming networks. It's great that you can make your content roughly an hour, but the creators have the room to kind of play with the show length so that they could tell the story that they want and not have to drag it out even more than they needed to. That's why I felt like, okay, it's okay that it was slow, but it wasn't excessively slow at times. I think it's visually beautiful. I liked how Disney really kind of ponied up the cash to make it just beautiful. It really harkened back to a lot of what Star Wars is in terms of like, Star Wars is best when it goes back to practical effects. Like, yes, it's set in space where there's, ships and lasers and crap like that happens all the time. But for the most part, it's Star Wars has succeeded the most when it does go back to practical effects, and I appreciate just how beautiful it is, how they made Baby Yoda, instead of CGI, an actual puppet, which to me that's a huge change, and I think that's a good change of how there's a story of how somebody, Favreau, asked if they should make Baby Yoda, which we all know, by the way, is not its real name, but since they haven't released the name, that's what we're going to call it. So there's reports out there where Favreau is like, yeah, guys, it's not the name. It's like, well, give us the name, else we don't know what to call it. So, and that's pretty funny. But no, Favreau asked if they should make Baby Yoda CGI, and the person he asked was like, hell no, like, do not do that, because Star Wars is best when it is rooted in practical effects, and it's just a beautiful show. I find the mythos about it very cool, because I also like keep up with like the Star Wars Clone Wars TV show and the Star Wars Rebels show, and these shows are a little bit important because they do give the backstory of a lot about the Mandalorian. Since Disney bought Lucasfilm, a lot of the expanded universe history of the Mandalorians has just been cut out of canon, which doesn't necessarily mean it's not inspiring, the Mandalorian TV show. It does. You could definitely see those themes being woven into the TV show, but you're kind of a little bit lost if you don't know anything about the Mandalorians besides, Jango Fett or Boba Fett from the movies, if you did not see the cartoon shows. And I like that because it does put the Mandalorian into, it's set in Star Wars, but also gives it this richer history too, that, like, you can watch it by itself, but you also, if you want to understand even more things, like, watch the TV shows. Yeah, I was talking with like my dad who likes Star Wars, and he was a little bit confused by the ending because, spoilers, the Darksaber shows up, and he was like, well, what was that about? I'm like, well, technically that guy has a rightful claim to rule all Mandalore. And he was like, well, what? And I was like, well, you got to watch the TV shows. And so he did, and he's liking it. And so I like how like Filoni's influence is there. Just overall, I thought it was a great show. Obviously, you could do better at times. It's one of the few shows where I wish that there was more of a supporting cast, and you got to see more of Gina Carano, I think I said her name right, it's character. I like her a lot. And it's nice to see Carl Weathers, and it's nice to see them show it more, because it's like for the first time in a TV show where I wish that there was more supporting characters, because there's some episodes where he kind of just did his own thing, and it's like, well, I mean, as much as I like it, I kind of wish that there was more people with the show, which I hardly ever say. Usually shows have too many supporting characters at times, but I mean, in some episodes the credits might only be like 3 people in the show, and it's like, well, that's impressive. But the take on the Mandalorians adopting strangers, that was kind of interesting. Foundlings. I think what is new though is the fact of making the vow that you can't take off your helmet, because we clearly seen in canon, either in the cartoons or in the movies, that the bounty hunters took off their helmets. Maybe not Boba Fett from episode 5 and 6, but especially Jango, he took off his helmet all the time, and so that was pretty cool. I could keep on talking about the show, but obviously I need to kind of wrap it up. I think this is a great start. I love the ending. I love how overall the season felt complete, but the ending led it further to be a second season, and so I feel like with some TV shows, it's just all about, like continuing the story next season. Whereas in this show, it's like you could have ended it. I would have been totally fine with what we got, for the most part. And so I guess my biggest complaint, and this is more from a strategic perspective, is that they should have released The Mandalorian sooner so that they could have totally sold some Baby Yoda merch. That's for me like if Disney, the joke is that Disney just loves money. Just loves to print money. It's like that could have been a great way to just print money, is to just release this before the Christmas season rolled around, so that suppliers can get Baby Yodas and people could have bought them, because I'm pretty sure I would have bought one for my kid if it was out in the stores by then. But that's my one real complaint. Otherwise, I think it's great caretaking. It's a great example of being set in a world of an existing property but making it unique in its own. Because I know a lot of people are always, I kind of make fun of these studios of they're just going back through the back catalogs and trying to make new content, whatever. And it's like, well, that's fine, but you really got to be, people just don't want to repeat of the old. They want something that they know, but also something new. And I think that The Mandalorian really did a good job of that. And obviously, people, if you, I could keep talking about this all day long. So that is my take. I think it's one of the best shows of the year. Yeah. So I do not have Netflix. I dropped that. I'm going to regret that a little bit. So I'm going to get back. I'm probably going to get it soon. So you tell me about Witcher. I know it's from a book. I know it's based on a book series. I know it's got Henry Cavill, and I know him from DC properties and whatnot. So,
yeah.
How was the show? Is it Game of Thrones, but on Netflix?
So here's the thing. I've never read the books, so I can't sit here and say, how it compares to the books. I know that there's a video game out there for The Witcher as well that's also based off the books, and then there's a video game, and the show is directly, and my understanding is that it's directly related to the books, not necessarily the storyline that's in the game. I've never played the game either. I'd never even heard of The Witcher up until I found out that there was a series coming to Netflix, and Netflix was touting it as their version of Game of Thrones. And I was like, okay, I don't like every fantasy series that gets put out, but there are plenty of fantasy series that I do watch that I enjoy. So I'll definitely check this out and see what it is. My wife also really likes fantasy stuff too. She is the type of person who'd read books. She has not read these books, and so I was interested to see her take as well. So we watched the first episode, we enjoyed it, we kept going, we watched it. So the series released the Friday before Christmas, and I think we watched the first and second episode that first weekend, and then just because of timing and the holidays and stuff, we didn't actually finish it up until I believe the following week or week and a half or whatever. But it was 8 episodes, just like The Mandalorian. It was very well paced. I think the main confusion for a lot of people is that there's this thing that they do with timelines where there's like 3 consecutive timelines that are happening at varying points in time, and as the story progresses and you get further into the episodes, you start to see the timelines link up, but there's a lot of stuff that's still not happening at the same time, and it's confusing because you don't actually know that that's what's happening until I think you get to episode 3, and then you realize, wait, well, how could that happen if that just happened? And it's a little confusing, but I didn't mind it. It worked fine for me. I like shows that make me think about what I'm watching, not just lay it all out. But the series was very, very good. As far as comparing it to Game of Thrones, the comparisons kind of drop at a fantasy series set in a medieval time frame, because the thing is, I will say this, it's definitely well produced. They definitely spent some money on it. I don't think they spent the money that they did on, that HBO spent on Game of Thrones, because there was just certain elements of the CG that they used for the dragon and some of the creatures that you could tell they just weren't up to the same par as what HBO had. And that's nothing against it. I still think it worked fine. I didn't have a problem with the quality of the CG. It just, you could tell from what you were seeing was that it wasn't as high as what it's being compared to with Game of Thrones. The other part of it is it follows 3 different characters, and that's the extent. It's not like Game of Thrones where it sprawls all across multiple continents, multiple characters, storylines. And as Game of Thrones condensed down to the final seasons, there was less characters that it was focusing on. But in the earlier seasons, there were so many different characters that they were focusing on, that was one of the things that I think a lot of people that gravitated, because there was a character that you could relate to or you could really appreciate and you'd want to follow to find out their story. With Witcher, there's only 3 characters. And while they're all very interesting characters, I can't see every single person gravitating to one of the 3. But the thing is, if you don't relate to one of them, you're at least going to root for one of them, sure. But it's not as if they're not, it's not like Game of Thrones in the sense of Game of Thrones had the good guys, the bad guys, and the neutral guys. The people that they're focusing on are all the same level. They're all connected and they're all important. It's not as if they're focusing very heavily on the bad or the neutral. They're just focusing on the 3 characters that are very important to the story. But that's not a bad thing. I want to make that clear. I thought the series was very well made. It was very good. The production quality was very high. Like, overall, it was great. I can't wait for the next season. I think it's actually already been renewed for not just a second season, but also a third season as well. And it was very successful. When you listen to our next episode that we release next week, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be comparing The Mandalorian and The Witcher, and specifically because there was reports that The Witcher was much more popular than The Mandalorian, and I want to address those. Not that it's not true or that it is true, but I want to address that conversation because I think that people don't have all of the information when they're looking at the comparison between the two, and so that's something that I want to discuss with you next week when we talk about the service news. So with that being said, we're going to round out this episode real quick. There was an insane amount of trailers that were released. So real quick, I'm just going to run through them. Russell Peters deported on Prime Video. This is on January 17th. And with an E, season 3 on Netflix on January 3rd. To All the Boys, P.S. I Still Love You on Netflix February 12th. Leslie Jones, Time Machine on Netflix January 14th. Medical Police on Netflix January 10th. Little America on Apple TV Plus January 17th. Sex Explained Season 1 on Netflix, January 2nd. Letterkenny Season 8 on Hulu, December 27th. Endlings on Hulu, January 17th. Into the Dark, Midnight Kiss on Hulu, December 27th. Killer Inside, The Mind of Aaron Hernandez on Netflix, January 15th. High Fidelity on Hulu, February 14th. Jam Tara on Netflix, January 10th. Giri Haji on Netflix, January 10th. Vice Investigates Disgrace, January 3rd. Ragnarok on Netflix, January 31st. Little Kenny Season 1 on Hulu, December 27th. Grace and Frankie Season 6 on Netflix, January 15th. Star Trek Short Treks Children of Mars on CBS All Access, January 9th. Dracula on Netflix, January 4th. Tyler Perry's A Fall from Grace on Netflix, January 17th. Visible out on television on Apple TV Plus, February 14th. Hunters on Prime Video, February 21st. The Goop Lab with Gwyneth Paltrow on Netflix, January 24th. Narcos Mexico Season 2 on Netflix, February 13th. Cheer on Netflix, January 8th. Family Reunion Part 2 on Netflix, January 20th. Diary of a Future President on Disney Plus, January 17th. Sex Education Season 2 on Netflix, January 17th. Louis Miguel, the series, Season 2 on Netflix, sometime in 2020. Mythic Quest Raven's Banquet on Apple TV Plus, February 7th. Lock and Key on Netflix, February 7th. Ozark Season 3 on Netflix, March 27th. Healing Powers of Dude on Netflix, January 13th. And October Faction Season 1 on Netflix, January 23rd. So if you didn't know, there's a lot of stuff coming in a very short amount of time. If you had any doubt that the holidays were over and they were going to pull back on the amount of content that's releasing, no, that's not happening. So definitely head over to our website, thestreamingwars.io, and click on the streaming release calendar, specifically to see all of the releases that are coming in the coming weeks, to find out what you would like to watch on the variety of different streaming services that you subscribe to. In addition to that, you can email us at thestreamingwars@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future. You can follow us on Twitter and join our Discord for all the latest articles that we discuss here on the podcast and some that we don't discuss on the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram for all the latest announcements related to new episodes of the podcast. You can also find this episode available on all podcast platforms as well as Pandora and on YouTube. The links are always very easy to find. Just head over to thestreamingwars.io and you can find the links to all of those variety of different podcast platforms over on the site. So with all of that being said, there was a lot to cover, but we've done it, and this episode ran much longer than normal, but we had a lot to talk about. For Tony and myself, this has been The Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.